Good morning, everyone. We are here. And today I'm going to be reading about how man's consciousness is greater than God's. I'm sure that'll please a lot of theologians. And so just a moment, I need to close my door. We can scream and shout all you want. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you. So just a reminder to everyone that this will be the last regular session of this reading group for a couple of weeks, because we are doing our confluence called The Creator's Art, a confluence of art, psychology, and renewal. Next weekend, we start on Friday, and I will be flying to Montana with my wife on Wednesday to do that. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be anything on this channel. I will be broadcasting live, including many of the events of the confluence. So if you're not able to be with us, you will be able to see some of the events that we do. And just a moment while I admit Jordan to our session. So as I say, I'm going to do as much broadcasting as possible from Helena, Montana over this weekend, which means that there will be a series of videos and also live streams. I don't think I'll be able to follow a chat from my iPhone. And so it will be catch as catch can. I hope to broadcast our play live. This will occur, if it occurs at all, it will occur at 9:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. For me, it'll be 7:30 p.m. Mountain time, but it will be 9:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern time, so you can get your time zone from that. And so if we're successful in broadcasting live, that's when it will be on. If we're not successful, then I will endeavor to publish all or part of the play in video at some point. We are having it professionally videographed, but that won't be ready immediately. So what you'll get is my amateur iPhone recording, if you get it. Hey, Jordan, how are you?
Good morning, Skip. Good. How about you?
Hanging in there. A lot of very busy time for us. We have Jyoti Swaminathan joining us, hopefully.
Nice.
Oh, she declined. Okay. So anyway, she's going to be here as a guest, and I will allow her to talk if she wishes to. And
welcome.
I like your heron, Jyoti. That's very nice. Anyway, so how is everything in Taos? Are you ready to come to Helena?
You know, it's amazing. The fires they're doing beyond a good job.
Really good.
A little bit the last week. The new group took over. They're kind of switching out teams, and the coffee thing will stop in just a second. But right when they switched teams the last time, the wind kicked up.
Oh boy.
And it's interesting because it's always an interesting transition anyway, but then the teams have all been so good that for 4 days with the winds, they actually held it.
Good.
And it didn't move towards Angel Fire. And Sipapu is kind of just a wasteland now. It's just sticks and ash. The whole forest is gone pretty much. But with high winds for 4 days, they held it. And so there's still fires, but they're doing quite the job. And the big thing it's coming out too, is that the prescribed burns in January that were normal. They did that, but that it then snowed right after. And there were embers that were just nesting under the snow the whole time, so that's also contributory.
Oh boy.
So it's quite honestly, it's quite an answer to Joe. there are a lot of things going against this poor forest and our trees. So
well, good. So anyway, probably from Friday morning, possibly even from Thursday, we will be broadcasting live and giving you greetings from Helena, Montana, and we'll see what all we manage to broadcast. We won't be broadcasting the nude modeling session, so you'll miss that if you're not present. And as you might guess,
I'll be right back.
Okay. And what you will also miss is the interaction among these 30 very powerful players who in the arts and psychology, including John Jackson, our psychiatrist friend, retired, and Bob Manis, who's a practicing clinical psychologist, and our world famous artists that will be there. And so we hope you can join us, and we hope you can join, if you can't physically be there, we hope you can join the video that will be posted on YouTube. And anyway, okay. So today we're going to go on with paragraph 660. And what I would say as a preface to this is we are definitely down among them. We're about halfway through this book, and we're definitely in the paragraphs which Christian and probably Jewish theologians hate about this book. Maybe Hindus and Buddhists too. But they are Dr. Jung's perceptions. I follow this path because it seems more true to me. And Jordan, I don't know why you follow this path. Do you want to speak for yourself?
All roads lead to Jung.
Yeah, they do.
And I think that other than just reading it yourself from the biblically standalone, where of course, it opens out with, wow, look at this deity wagering with this poor man's soul.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this isn't what I was taught in Sunday school. Wow, I don't know if I'm
Right.
going to be putting any more change in that plate. There's tuna passing around. I
Yeah.
remember the first time I read it, but
Well,
I
of
think
course,
all roads lead to Jung. Yeah,
yeah, of course, the book of Job has been in the Bible since 325 AD.
right,
And Job, the actual writing, as we'll see here, was written between 300 and 600 BC, before Christ,
right,
before the Christian era. And so it's a very, very old story. And so Dr. Jung is simply commenting on the meaning of it.
right.
And it's been hidden by the Christian church, in my opinion. And so anyway, I'm going to begin, and we'll start with paragraph 660, which is on page 55 of this version of Answer to Job.
I will say though, I remember in junior high saying, can in Sunday school, can you tell us about Job a little bit? I mean, I'm going to read that, and I want your perspective so I can be guided. It was like I was so innocent. And so I won't read it wrong. I probably said, I'm like sixth or seventh grade. And they said, well, it's about responsibility and the cause of responsibility, that is suffering. And there's great value to that kind of suffering. Well, so, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to go learn some responsibility. I might as well read the Constitution, and I'm going to read Job. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I'll read the Constitution again. Because when I got into it, my eyes just went like, and I come back and I'm like, I don't know if I'm that committed. So,
Yeah.
so anyway.
So just to as a reprise to the story, God's first son is Satan. It's not Christ. Right. Okay. First of all, God's first son is Satan. And so Satan is in God's court in heaven, and he makes a wager with God that he can get Job to curse God. And of course, one of the big questions in our play is, did Rabbi Leo Beck curse God when he was in the concentration camps of Europe during World War II? Obviously, he did not, since he survived. But Satan wanted to see if he could make Job give up on God, and he couldn't, even though he treated Job quite poorly in the story.
Right.
And the result is that, Job was a pious man, and he got what he deserved ultimately, I suppose. And so this is sort of Jung calling out the authors of the book of Job, or calling out God and saying, this is what this means, and
right.
You need to pay attention. So, okay, so first paragraph, it's only 6 lines long, but it's filled with stuff. Okay. Because the Imago Dei pervades the whole human sphere and makes mankind its involuntary exponent, it is just possible that the 400-year-old schism in the church and the present division of our political world into 2 hostile camps are both expressions of the unrecognized polarity of the dominant archetype. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, that basically, go back to 7th grade, here's your current events, pull the newspaper article, and what's happening right now.
Right. Why does God do this thing to good people?
Right.
Question.
And makes mankind its involuntary exponent. That 3 squared is 9. The 2, the exponent, the little bitty number. Why is this little number of man orbiting around the human sphere, orbiting around God, and in this us versus them?
Right. And so, we see Satan doing his works now in the form of the Russian attack on Ukraine as an example. And I don't think it's arguable that Vladimir Putin represents Satan in this context. But
and also the 400-year-old schism. I mean, if I look at that piece too, then we have the Satan acting as well in a small fry, unnoticeable, subtle change long-term of rites of passage, little by little being disappeared from society, so that, say, late 70s, early 80s, the average male adolescence lasted until 28. That's at least 16 years too long. That's a whole lifetime of a 16-year-old times 2, that they're not a man or a woman. And then by the 90s, it was to 42, if ever, that people would evolve to become, the child becomes the parent of the adult. And so then you, in a sense, seeding this, sowing dissent, or fertilizing the ground for dissent, so that now with the Putin piece, this thing's got legs. It's got a place to be and a place to grow and thrive, instead of, honestly, the embers under the snow come to mind.
Right. So
something brewing.
So the Imago Dei here is Latin for the image of God, and it pervades the whole human sphere, meaning in all religions, there's some version of God or an objective. That's arguable in Buddhism because Christ and Buddha represent two ends of a spectrum of how much God is present. And in Buddhism, one is seeking nirvana, which means the end of being. And in Christianity, we are presented with the fact that all life is suffering in one way or another, and we have to learn that. And yesterday I was at my grandson's graduation from high school party, and that young man has no clue about how difficult life is right now, because he's been given everything that he's needed in his life. And so he's wearing the dark shades, the reflective shades, and he's got several girls around him, hanging around him, and he doesn't understand how difficult it is in life. And interestingly, I was chatting with the coach of the Christian school that my daughter sends her children to, and he was saying he went to Liberty University. And I said, well, did you ever see a situation where 36 years after a divorce, the grandparents of a child were both within 20 meters of one another? And sure enough, my ex-wife was there, and her husband, and my current wife and me, and we get along perfectly well. And we had photos taken together, and everything was hunky-dory. And it's a very rare thing, but I'm proud of the way we managed the situation now. So I simply think of my ex-wife like a sister today. I love her. She's the mother of my children, but I don't want to live with her anymore, and haven't wanted to
No,
for,
and and
for a
that's
long
interesting to me
time.
too, because that overarching quality of even the quote unquote schism that has, resolved to come back together near him, and also the he has no idea part. It's, okay, here, we're going to have you fast for 2 or 3 or 4 days, and then we're going to put a bag over your head and take you miles and miles and miles away in the wilderness and leave you. And when you wake up, you got to find your way home. And part of that's going to be finding your way home inside, and that's the passage of becoming an adult in, ancient cultures. And you might get eaten by a wolf, or you might get assisted by a wolf. You just don't know. But the thing is, that experience takes the juvenile piece, that idyllic, as you're saying, he's been given everything. The community has always been in support of, which in ancient cultures, similar to that. But 3 or 4 days later comes back, and his eyes are changed, her eyes are changed, depending on, man or a woman. And the passage, literally, look at the movie Star Wars, and going through the dark cave. There are all kinds of direct metaphors that are just played out in a lot of literature and films. The Old Man and the Sea is a big one, going out with the loss of what your treasure was, except you found yourself. And
Right.
kind of, so it's a good, I think that's a good example you bring up with the high school graduation. I personally felt lucky, because at graduation I was already exhausted. I had like an 8-hour black belt test earlier that day.
Oh,
so I was sitting there, and aren't you nervous? I have no idea what that means anymore. I've had plenty of that already today. I just need to walk across the stage and get this thing they give me and come back and sit back down, because I'm tired.
So we want to talk about the term the dominant archetype for a minute, because Murray Stein, who's is a leading Jungian analyst, he now lives in Switzerland, but he's an American, and has been writing about Jungian religion for a very long time, says that at bottom, Jung believes there's only one archetype, and that archetype is God, or it's the dominant archetype of human life, which Jung was asked, why do you call this God? And he said, well, it's always been called God. It's a perfectly good name for it. So why shouldn't I use God?
It ain't broken, so don't fix it.
Right. And so when he says the unrecognized polarity of the dominant archetype, what he's saying is that finally, at the time of Job now, so we're talking 1700 years ago or so, or no, 2700 years ago or so, almost 3000 years ago, Job was the first to recognize that God has a dark side. And the word didn't get out very much in humanity until now. And so we're talking about it, and people who are watching this program today will think about it, and think about the dark side of God and the evil things that God's nature does. But now we're going to get into the real soup, because we're going to talk about how humanity is, well, we have one more paragraph here. Leave it leave it to you to read.
I will certainly read it. I think there's a trickster with Jung here too, that are both expressions of the unrecognized polarity of the dominant archetype. Well, I kind of would be remiss if I didn't say it's an unrecognized polarity of 6 characters. There's a trinity of unrecognized polarities. There's the above and below, the God and the Satan piece, the good and the evil piece, or good and the better piece, like BETTER, like someone who bets, gambling kind of thing, casting lots, as it were, biblically. But there's also the superficial love of power piece that's going on here, for that to die into ashes, to become the power of love, to phoenix that to emerge. There's also the unrecognized polarity of where the heck is Shekinah? Mom's away, the cat's away, so the boys will play kind of thing. Where's the female aspect of the Godhead in the original creator aspect there? And I think so those, 3 pairs of unrecognized polarities, honestly, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Father, God, M-I-G-O-D-A, Son, in this case, Satan prior to Christ, that Christ became, when he went before the cross, but then the Holy Ghost, Sophia, Shekinah. And so I think all 3 of those are basically assaulting Job in the ghetto, so to speak.
Right.
He's just been attacked by a gang, a divine gang, as it were. So to express the unrecognized polarity piece seems to be, it's more than just a double. I think there's a triple of doubles.
In Buddhism, this polarity is expressed as duality.
Yes.
And the object of Buddhism is to have all dualities done away with.
Right, to become both and instead of the unified, instead of either or.
Right. And a couple of other points I want to make about the chat here. Kushbu is a dear friend of ours from long ago. So if you're wondering about who she is on this chat, and she lives in Bangalore, India. And she is going to do one of the presentations on one of the presentations on the confluence, and that her presentation will be on this Friday, and she will be talking about Indian perspectives. And I'm not going to steal her thunder, so I'll let her talk about it on Friday, but I am going to try to broadcast her session. It will be, assuming that I can do that, it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on this coming Friday. And it's noon. It'll be 12 o'clock noon in Helena when we do that. And so I'm looking forward to Kushbu's session. And then Danny Van Heck says, I'm not sure there even is a God, but if there is, I seriously doubt human beings can figure out what that would be. Such a God would be more complex than quantum physics, goes way above our heads. Well, assuredly, it's more complex than quantum physics because God is everything. And in the end, and as Dr. Jung said, God is really the unconscious and the collective unconscious. So each of us has a little piece of God, which we call the God image, but God, in the greater sense, is the collective unconscious, at least according to Jung. And that's the way I would put it, because we see how the ebbs and flows of human behavior get played out unconsciously, and we're seeing it very clearly in Ukraine and Russia right now.
Well, in quantum physics and prior to quantum physics, I don't see them as terribly complex. I see them all as mathematical, not arithmetical numbers, mathematical averages of capital in nature. And they're just simply trying to describe what the heck is going on in our universe. And even if I take CERN, which is firing up, so to speak, no pun intended, again, that's trying to take the whole universe in one minute scale. And to me, you shift focus and redirect scales to the clashing of two protons to create new particles. I don't think you're creating new particles. I think you're, in a sense, doing this Gray's Anatomy, Da Vinci dissection in a way to get the thing to come apart itself, because we don't know how to pull it apart. And, obsidian can only cut so small, kind of thing. So I think the mathematical averages of how we perceive the world is that's what quantum physics is the current version of.
But
it's still not there. And then the dark matter, and then it's ad infinitum, which can get kind of ad nauseum.
It is. So we've now at CERN proven the Higgs boson exists, and that only costs us multi-billions of dollars to achieve that. But oh, by the way, there's still the question of why. And you can go all the way back to the Big Bang and ask how and why was there a Big Bang 14 billion years ago?
And that's a good point, because once you start to open up to the how and the why, you have taken a discerning look, in the best cases, at the what. And the what is the substance, and not that, we see this thing and we named it. Literally, what is it? What is the substantial being or matter or identity of these particles?
And so the scientists just say, oh, well, that was a singularity. Okay. And why is there a singularity? Why was there? Good grief.
There's a black hole. It's the center of every galaxy. And but by the way, there's some rogue black holes that just move at this many 1,000 million miles an hour that travel across galaxies. Well, what's up with that? It's like everything's in orbit, including black holes.
And one hopes that one doesn't get munched down on by a rogue black hole. But anyway, Jordan, I'm going to leave it to you to read paragraph 661. I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Paragraph 661. The traditional view of Christ's work of redemption reflects a one-sided way of thinking, no matter whether we regard that one-sidedness as purely human or as willed by God. The other view, which regards the atonement not as the payment of a human debt to God, but as reparation for a wrong done by God to man, has been briefly outlined above. This view seems to me to be better suited to the power situation as it actually exists. The sheep can stir up mud in the wolf's drinking water, but can do him no other harm. So also the creature can disappoint the creator, but it is scarcely credible that he can do him a painful wrong. This lies only in the power of the creator with respect to the powerless creature. On this view, a wrong is imputed to God, but it is certainly no worse than what has already been imputed to him if one assumes that it was necessary to torture the Son to death on the cross merely in order to appease the Father's wrath. What kind of father is it who would rather his son were slaughtered than forgive his ill-advised creatures who have been corrupted by his precious Satan? What is supposed to be demonstrated by this gruesome and archaic sacrifice of the Son? God's love, perhaps, or his implacability? We know from chapter 22 of Genesis and from Exodus 22:29 that Yahweh has a tendency to employ such means as the killing of the son and the firstborn in order to test his people's faith or to assert his will, despite the fact that his omniscience and omnipotence have no need whatever of such savage procedures, which moreover set a bad example to the mighty ones of the earth. It is very understandable, therefore, that a naive mind is apt to run away from such questions and excuse this maneuver as a beautiful sacrificium intellectus, or mental sacrifice. If one prefers not to read the 89th Psalm, the matter will not end there. He who cheats once will cheat again, particularly when it comes to self-knowledge. But self-knowledge in the form of an examination of conscience is demanded by Christian ethics. They were very pious people who maintained that self-knowledge paves the way to knowledge of God. And Skip returning here shortly. It's interesting to me here, the consistent sacrifice of the Son. And I think a metaphorical death is being presented throughout, where that's the child becoming the parent of the adult. So rather than the man sacrificing the boy or woman sacrificing the girl, it's that the boy or the girl are growing up. They're individuating their rite of passaging. So I think there is a metaphorical story here that's consistently presented throughout the Bible, especially of the son, the father trying to kill the son, the father intending to kill the son, whether they complete it or not. It's really not the father killing the son, it's the son killing the self-father to become the parent of himself as the man. So there's a rite of passage here, I think, that's implied. But as Jung aptly puts, very, very understandable that a naive mind is apt to run away from such questions and excuse this maneuver as a beautiful sacrificium intellectus, the mental sacrifice, doing something just for the sake of it. So that also
and literally, and a sacrifice of not thinking about it.
Yes, yeah.
Going to church and taking everything the pastor says is gospel when he's just a man too, or a woman, and they are flawed, as are the rest of us. There's some really poignant questions here. What is supposed to be demonstrated by this gruesome and archaic sacrifice of the Son? The crucifixion of Christ.
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of the myth of, is it Uranus or, wow, the names are escaping me right now, but then maybe it was Zeus. But you can correct me with naming. But where as the children are being born, he's eating them. And
that's the Titans. Titans eating their children.
Yeah, Titans eating their children. And so she gets to a point and she substitutes one of them with a rock, so she can steal it away and hands him, feeds him the rock as if she's, complicit. And he eats the rock, thinks he's eating the kid. And, he's all sated now because he ate the children. Got to get your 4 food groups. It's like, oh, you want some milk or coffee with that, Mr. DA? But but it's interesting then, of course, then that one escapes and is able to then later come back and liberate his siblings from the stomach of the god. So in a sense, there's a second womb going on in that eating. But again, at first blush, you're not going to think, oh, we're dealing with epic, like EPOCH, epic, level evolutions. We're dealing with cannibalism.
Yeah.
And the people rarely get past that surface. So like Jung says, the naive mind will skip over it easily. And
okay, so there's an important Jungian and psychological aspect here, which is that psychic energy, that which keeps us from being inert, is a pair of opposites. And so all energy comes from a duality, which, you can think of it in the sense of the electrical duality of how alternating current works, for example.
right.
But everything in your life has that duality and that conscience. And, if you're raising children, you have to keep them safe because they don't know about the duality. And so you have to teach them what they have to do to stay alive, literally. And,
Right.
Keeping in mind that every human being at birth is just a wild animal. That baby doesn't know squat. Well, actually, that's not true. I mean, the baby has its instincts within us, but it would die probably within an hour if it weren't for the fact that a very gracious goddess stuck a nipple in its mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without that, baby's not going to go too far. And she does that because that baby is hers. It's a part of her, and she doesn't want to lose it. And of course, it's quite tragic when people lose children. And
It is, and it's, to me, that's the one place to me where the one physics example does almost wholly apply. Of, you take the 2 or the 3 metal balls, and you drop one, and an energy transfer, boom, boom,
right,
boom.
right.
Now life has started. And what's interesting is, like, for example, sometimes sickness will be like a gasket stuck between those, and so they're not bouncing as far, and it diminishes the life force. And for example, with your condition and the radiation therapy last year, your attitude said, no, that gasket's not going to make this less. I don't need that diminishment of this. And you just stepped into the procedure, and this is part of my life, and it kept this thing moving without diminishment, with change, and not without difficulty, but it, certainly not without difficulty, but it didn't dim you. In fact, if anything, it turned a different brightness on. I mean,
but I mean, this issue of conscious and consciousness, we're seeing this play out in the United States right now. The United States currently in our politics is absolutely certifiable. Okay, we're insane because we're the only country in the world that has this fetish about guns, and nowhere else in the world is there anything like the number of mass shootings that we have in the U.S. And the sad thing that I have to say about Uvalde is we're going to probably have 100 or 1,000 more Uvaldes before the human conscience of Americans as a group wakes up sufficiently to say, that really is enough. I mean, we can say it. It's right now. It's just window dressing. It's a word that politicians put out there to say enough, but it's not going to stop until it's actually enough. And
and I saw a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I saw a chart, and a bar chart, and it was the number of mass shootings and the countries that have had mass shootings around the world since 2009, and about 26, I think, countries. The U.S. had 105. The closest one was France at 5. I think Spain had 3, and then maybe Italy had 2, which then that starts to be margin of error anomaly from a 105. And then every single other one had 1. And now in the last 2 weeks, I would have to go back to that graph and go, that data is inconsistent with the facts, because now 105 would be 107, because we had another one even just, days after Uvalde.
And, and then how did you define a mass shooting there?
I think it was that, I think it was the details of the calculus were 1 shooter to over 8 people, and at one time. And I don't. So
I might agree. I might agree with that number, that statistic. But just in the last week, we've had 60.
Shootings.
That are over 4.
That are over 4. Right.
Right. And so it's one thing that we have more suicide deaths by firearms in the United States. Okay, we are whacked out on that, obviously. But
the question to me is, what is society not doing? Not doing, but what is society not doing in the natural psychological development of kids and youth and adults continuing to evolve in America that is not occurring anywhere else? And to me, it's the children running the family and lack of rite of passage. And I'm going to give you a trophy because you're just breathing. Yeah. I mean, and I hate to put it that way, but I don't mean that everyone, I don't want to impart suffering on anyone. I don't wish it on anyone, but life itself is not chaos, it's nature. Yeah. And nature will kill you, and nature will also support you very much. Mm-hmm. But there's an intensity with which what you have to,
there's a point being made here, which is from the time of Job, which was at least 300 years before Christ.
Right.
Jung's point is that there was a recognition in the unconscious. So it wasn't consciously expressed, but there was a recognition in the unconscious. And actually, he dates this back to Ezekiel, which he can date, which is 592 BC, right. Where there was a consciousness that God is going to become man. Okay.
Right.
And not only one man, but all men who see that in themselves. Okay?
Are all people.
All men and women, right. all people. And we have to start being careful about how we read this. Thanks to Colleen, I'm being more conscious of it. But but the point is that it took at least 300 years for the realization of a God-man, to actually manifest in the form of Jesus Christ. And then it took another almost 2,000 years from the time of Christ to the time of Carl Jung to realize that, oh, by the way, back there in John 1 through 14, it actually says that we can all become children of God. Okay?
Right.
So there was consciousness of it all the way back, at least no later than 325 AD, when 325 of the Christian era, I guess is the right way to say it now. But when the Council of Nicaea came together and they said, okay, this is the Bible, the book of John got in the New Testament. And the book of John says very clearly, I mean, this is one thing that, I was not, and I am not an expert theologian, but what really ripped me for years, for decades, was the idea that God is a word. In the beginning was a word. And the word was with God, and the word was God. And so I kept getting hit by that. And so finally I said, well, hasn't ever anything happened since John 1:1? Hasn't anything happened since the beginning? And I didn't have to look too far, because it's actually in, I think, John 1:12, that we can all become children of God. And it's not of, I don't remember the exact words, but it's not by birth, and it's not by this and that, but it is just we can be children of God if we are called to be. And
well, it's interesting, even you bringing that up in terms of AD or CE, Christian era. To me, the fact that we're politically correctly, biblically saying Christian era, or after, it's another example of a waste of language. Just like the dictionary has all these medico-scientific terms, because of the mistranslation, typically from Greek to Latin, of just pronouns. Because Anno Domini means the year of the Lord, not the year of our Lord. And the year of the Lord has no attachment to Christianity whatsoever. It's based and it started there, but the Lord becomes general, becomes DEI.
mm-hmm.
But our Lord becomes a religion. And the our Lord is a vast mistranslation of the simple pronoun of thee to our. And so I think even people not seeing how to see through the erroneous language that they're given to speak and listen to every day, which becomes bad scholarly marketing that takes a severe toll on people having consciously accurate expectations versus one long 2,000-year delusion of even how the time is referred to in the Gregorian calendar.
Absolutely. And this is my point, that it's going to take a lot more mass shootings before we wake up enough to actually stop it. Okay.
Yeah.
It can be stopped. It's not happening anywhere else particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, we Americans are literally certifiable as a nation because we're allowing this to continue. But
if a little kid's beating another kid with a stick, whether I scold him or not, I'm still going to take the stick away.
Yeah.
Well,
and the same applies to abortion. So when Roe v. Wade was decided, that was the starting point of the right adopting, that we had to get rid of Roe v. Wade. And so they hammered on it for whatever it is, 40, 50 years almost. And the problem with that is that, my daughters, for example, my eldest daughter is 47. My daughters actually have lived entirely under the rule of Roe v. Wade. and they don't remember just how horrible it was before Roe v. Wade. I mean, our abortion situation was actually horrible before that, in the same sense as these mass shootings today. And women were dying from childbirth. Women were committing felonies. My mother on her deathbed told me two secrets. One of them was that she had voted for JFK in 1960. And the other was that, my two grandmothers, between them, had 5 abortions, 5. And these were Victorian women who had these abortions in the 1920s. Think about that. They had these abortions in the 1920s, and both of them raised 3 beautiful children. Okay, one of whom is my father, and one of whom is my mother. But these 2 women, at a time when contraception wasn't allowed, were driven to the point where they had to commit felonies, and the doctors that performed these abortions were committing felonies. And so when we're banning abortion, we're just sentencing ourselves in the United States to another horrible period where we see what the consequences of not allowing abortion really are.
No pun intended there. But
yeah, and so, the result is we're going to have our thick heads beaten on for probably another 30, 40, 50 years as the right wing realizes the horrors that they're brutalizing our society is what they're doing. And
interesting too that Jung thought all this would take 600 years. And if I look at the pandemic history, the Spanish flu in 1917, go figure that then everyone's hanging out, stuck in prison and at home, so to speak. And then you have the roaring 20s because everyone wants to get the heck out.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you also have that right wing ratcheting down on, all this intolerance and lack of temperance. And then 30, 40 or so years later, here comes McCarthyism.
Yeah.
Whereas here we're having all of that occur at the same time.
Yeah. And so, ultimately, abortion will be allowed in a medically clinical way. And ultimately, there won't be mass gun violence in the United States. How long that takes to happen, I don't know. It takes our collective unconscious a long time to become conscious enough. And, this is why our cable television channels have been beating on us for more than 2 weeks now about the Uvalde shooting, is to say, wake up, people, this is horrible, and you got to get in the game. All right, so I want to go back.
Oh, really quickly too, I find it a travesty that no one really notices that there should be as many laws about women's bodies on the books as there are men's, and that number is 0. Yeah. And so that right there to me provides an abject boundary encroachment of the freedoms of women, and that's a First Amendment violation. The U.S. government, I mean, if corporations have personhood, the U.S. government by scale would be personhood, and I think that, and maybe even smaller. But the thing is, then that is why is anyone comfortable with, men aren't regulated but women are? That's what you do to livestock, and that to me is the elephant in the room.
Well, it was
I
only
hate to
only
put it this
100
way, but
years
just
ago
how
that,
simple it is.
yeah, it's only 100 years ago that men in the United States acknowledged that women aren't livestock and
With
that they have
suffrage,
the vote.
right? The suffrage.
Right. But that too required a lot of blood. But I want to go back to this point in John. First, John 1, 12 to 13.
Now,
And
listen,
this is what it says. But as many received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, the children of God, even to them that believe in his name, which were born, and this is the important point, not of blood, so they're not physical children, nor of the will of the flesh, so you can't will it, nor of the will of humanity, you can't will it, but of God. In other words, if you recognize that you have a portion of God within you, then you can become a child of God just as Jesus Christ did.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in the very first chapter of the book of John, on the 12th and 13th verses. And so John 1:14 then says, and the word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So, you can be full of grace and truth too, if you grow a conscience, if you become conscientious about your life. And
I think John, in total across the board, is one of the best surveys of the different modes of being of particular phases of consciousness. It's so good at chaptering out a big picture, like a big brushstroke of the things that go into the types of consciousness and the modes of, of the flesh, of the will, of the, flesh, will. Now I'm thinking psychological function of flesh, feeling function, psychological function of will, thinking function. I mean, there's a whole psychological watch, I think, that's hidden in John. If you look at it, for example, take it from a business perspective. What's the big picture? What's our logistics? What's our outcome? What's our purpose? And you look at all that, and the agenda is clearly almost lined out in code, as it were. I mean, you have to read it dispassionately. But I think from a business perspective, John is one of the many roadmaps given that's so general and almost so self-evident that it's missed. I remember reading and what am I missing? I mean, I felt like I was reading this big giant unfilled pothole. And then I realized, it's not a pothole, it's in the text. This is telling me about the stages, the types of consciousness and modes of being.
Right. And this is the breakthrough that Jung really had. He really meditated on these issues and said, wait a minute, God isn't some benevolent God up there in the sky. God is everything and manifested in everything. And otherwise, in the end, there's no scientific explanation for the Big Bang, and he uses the famous rabbinical story where God pulls a bunch of dice out of his pocket and throws them on the floor and says, let there be a world. Okay.
Right.
And so scientists are still trying to figure out whether there are other universes besides this one.
Right.
Which from a mathematical point of view is entirely conceivable. From a
beyond plausible. And then no loss on me the irony of then gambling becomes illegal because you don't want to act like God because he casted lots to get us here. It's like,
yeah, but even if you acknowledge that, yes, there must be a multiverse with many universes, where did that come from? Still, you cannot, there's still a mystery no matter how deeply you go. And so one of the things I like about my calligraphy activity is that it makes me slow down and understand these passages word for word. And it makes me meditate on what this passage means. And so yesterday I gave my daughter the final version. I did several versions of my calligraphy on John 1 through 14. And as a 45th birthday present for her, to say to her, I acknowledge that this is true. Okay, I acknowledge that this is true. And here you can frame it and put it on the wall, and your father gave it to you. Okay.
Right.
Right. And that's a profound thing. But we need to move on here.
Really quickly, though, I think you hit a piece there that applies to modern culture. And that's, if there's a multiverse, very plausible. If there are multiple dimensions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's just assume there is. So, and because it's kind of no fun if we don't. I mean, and at the same time, like Carl Sagan said, if we're the only people here, that's a vast waste of space. And also, if that's the case, then other conscious life, more or less developed than us, the question is, will we be visited? Will we visit? The question is to relate. How do we relate to them? Not how do we war with them? How do we peace with them? How do we initially even just start the conversation? Do you walk across the room and there's an icebreaker? I mean, what's going on? So the problem that we have in our own culture is to relate. The schism is still present. We can't even get past the either or to the both and. There's no dignity and difference. So finding out about one another might be a helpful piece to learn how to relate. I mean, I don't know if an infinitive statement, just to, and a verb relate, is more important these days, but that's really there's a basis of all the problems of how we are not relating and how badly we are relating.
Right. And probably the most important image that's ever been taken is this one.
The little blue dot. That's
right.
Pale blue dot.
Right there, that pale blue dot. You are here. Okay. This was a famous, now famous astronomer, but at the time, I think she was a PhD candidate that got stuck alone at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, I guess. And she was monitoring Voyager as it left the universe, or as it left the solar system, the solar system. And she had it look back toward Earth. It was passing Saturn, obviously, because you see Saturn's rings in this picture. And she took this picture of Earth. Everything that ever lived, as far as we know, is there in that picture.
Pale, right.
Yeah. And so we have to get that perspective as a species, and as a nation, and so on, because nation states are really passé, and maybe we need them now because we still have a lot of wackos out there like Putin. But
feudalism, tribalism, it's a total regression. And in that sense, community, or actually civilization,
Yeah.
disconnected from nature, and makes people irritated. They don't know why sometimes, but because they're not around a tree or a bush or a rose or
Right.
and that kind
But
of civilization creates uncivilized behavior.
yeah, but now, I mean, surely it was understandable when human beings were coming up, because there was an aperture through which about 2,000 individuals passed who are related to all of us. Okay. Every one
Right.
of those, we are descended from every one of those 2,000 individuals. And so is every other human being on Earth. And then we spread out. And in those times, people didn't have a real perception of the pale blue dot. And so they said, oh, that area over there isn't being farmed. Why don't you start farming over there? And then we started to bump into one another, and then there started to be wars over land and so on. But now we've gotten to the point where the first generation really that can look back, human beings alive today, we're the first group that could look back and see the pale blue dot and how infinitesimally small we are. And that pale blue dot is a lifeboat, and it's the only lifeboat on the ship. And if we don't keep it from leaking out our atmosphere and a few other things, we're not going to have consciousness. So anyway, all right. So
Well, what kind of big good projects are we doing these days? I mean, take the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which actually were in Nineveh, and they built some 60 or more miles of 60-foot wide aqueducts to bring water to that garden. And then they use the Archimedean screw. I laugh, what, 150, 200 years before Archimedes, so it's like he stole it. And everyone thought it was in Babylon, because most of the people who wrote about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were Westerners who had never been there. There was like history essays, but they didn't have any direct experience. And anyway.
Right. Well, we could talk all day about the ancient seven wonders of the world, but we're not going to today. So paragraph 662, to believe that God is the summum bonum, that is the absolute good, is impossible for a reflecting consciousness. Such a consciousness does not feel in any way delivered from the fear of God, and therefore asks itself quite rightly what Christ means to it. That indeed is the great question. Can Christ be interpreted in our day and our age, or must one be satisfied with the historical interpretation? Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, and which historical interpretation? I mean, there's our schism. He's picked. I feel like Jung is wonderfully baiting us right there, and because he would know the historical interpretation, 6 generations of ministers, pastors in his forefathers, in his family, and so for him, the historical interpretation would be a safe set of words. But he's not dealing with mistranslations. He's dealing with probably personal retranslations to correct past errors. And then we see this, and people think the historical interpretation would be simply their interpretation.
Yes, so absolutely. Because in the biblical passage I just read, of course, in those 2 verses, is the origin of the Baptist idea of born again, which is the point being that you're born once as a animal, a wild animal that needs to be civilized, and you're born a second time into getting it. understanding that, this is all we get. You are here. This is now. And are you going to be a contributor to human life on this planet, or are you not?
Absolutely. And I think also the born again becomes a misappropriation of the concept of the phoenix, of the child becoming the parent of the adult, because you're then consciously stepping in from your animal, naive, early, puerile, childish, or to childlike. You reacclimating to now I have consciously deity. I have sanctity in my own life, rather than my life being given sanctity from some outside force. Now it's
we can't wait around for God to be good to us, because God's got bigger things to do.
The drive-through is closed. It's like
I mean, he threw his dice on the floor, and that's it. And so we either sink or swim, basically, as a species, and we have to wake up to that fact. And
well, when he threw his dice, it makes me wonder, did he get snake eyes? And that's where the duality came from, 1 and 1.
Good question. Although Jung tells the story as 5 die, I think.
Yeah. I think it is. But my joke is, did he lose so that we could win? It's like
right. But the point is, it's quite possible that God's out there just creating new universes all the time, and we get what we get, and so here we are, and what are we doing with it?
We're in just one of the sandboxes.
Let's say, so Wendigo says, what if you're God role playing as a human? Well, okay, that's funny. And the reality is that we are. And the question and the point that Jung is making here is that human beings have more conscience than God. And so we are in fact actual gods. And we're a part of the evolution of God. And that's why from the time of Job, there was a realization that God had to become man, and there had to be a Messiah. And the only difference between Christianity of all flavors and Judaism, and this applies to Islam as well, is has the Messiah come or has he not?
Well, and you just completely unwove the trickster of omnipresence, everywhere, all the time. That means in each of us, all of us.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. And so we're all a part of it. And oh, by the way, we're a pretty small part.
Yeah. Teeny. Yeah.
All right. You want to read 663?
Certainly. One thing, anyway, cannot be doubted. Christ is a highly numinous figure. The interpretation of him as God and the Son of God is in full accord with this. The old view, which is based on Christ's own view of the matter, asserts that he came into the world, suffered, and died in order to save mankind from the wrath to come. Furthermore, he believed that his own bodily resurrection would assure all God's children of the same future. Thoughts?
Right. Okay, so by numinous figure, this means people were thinking in terms of Ezekiel, and the Son of Man would become God, and the expectation of the Messiah. And so when this man physically came onto the scene, and his name was Jesus, Jesus was saying such different things, such numinous things, that he really set off a new way of thinking about the world. And this was really recognized by John the Baptist and many other people in Christ's time. And so John the Baptist was a contemporary of Jesus. They were both in the womb at the same time. And this is one of the wonderful insights of Mary Holmes, not related to Tim Holmes, at least not directly, but Mary Holmes, who recognized that that Mary, Mother of God, and Elizabeth were both pregnant at the same time. And Elizabeth is the mother of John the Baptist. And so
what's interesting too is every time I hear the word Jesus, I don't cringe, but it reminds me of piss poor translations, because it's Iesus, because the Latin doesn't have a J. That's like same with, it's not the mysterium conjunctionis, it's a conjunctionis, because it's an Iesus, I-O-S-E, as there is no J in Latin. So it really originally was an I. So even pronouncing Jesus is true and is correct, but at the same time,
in
it doesn't
English.
it doesn't hearken to, in English, it doesn't hearken to the original Iesus, and the ichthyos roots of the fish.
For example, the name Isabella, I know in Isabella here in Annapolis, it means Jesus the Beautiful, or Beautiful Jesus. And so people have been naming their children after Jesus for 2,000 years. And, Isabella, my friend Isabella, is quite a realized adept, I would say. But she isn't a numinous figure like Christ was, who said things that allowed people to think different ideas. And that's also what Carl Jung is. That's why Carl Jung has been constantly fascinating to not only me, but to Edward Edinger, because as Edinger says, Jung went back and opened up so much that, he was in fact a numinous figure. And there's no doubt that he was, because you just pick up the Red Book and it's so filled with wisdom in almost every sentence that you can't even imagine it. I mean, and one of the things I've been doing for the Confluence is I've made a bookmark for everyone who attends that contains a quote on the front side, and on the back side it has the citation where I got that quote, and also the name of the Confluence. But the point was that I got all those sentences in about 12 pages of the Red Book. And I produced 45 of them so far. Maybe I'll get up to my 50 before I come to Helena. But the point is that the Red Book is so full of wisdom that you can't even imagine it. And back when Twitter was really getting going, and I was getting started in it in 2010, I heard that somebody was quoting the verses of the Bible on Twitter. And so I said, well, okay, maybe I can do that in terms of the Red Book. And so I was going to do it paragraph by paragraph. And of course, if the verses come out and you just see one verse, it's still wisdom, right? But if after I put it up there, if you found it, it would be all in a row, 5 sentences, let's say, in a paragraph on average. And so I started to put these sentences in, but I put them in reverse order because that would mean that they would stack up on top of each other, and the first sentence would be the last one published. But
Right.
for anybody that came along later, they could read it in correct order, right? And so I started to do this, and what I figured out was that you can absolutely read the red book in reverse order, sentence by sentence, and it makes absolutely the same amount of sentences as if you had read it forward.
What's interesting about that to me is it becomes a visual language, literally, the text. I mean, you can turn that picture around any way you want. It's still a picture. It still can influence you. And the text, forwards, backwards, sideways, and another, that's text. It's that much communication from the capital S self. It does that. And then, so you see it going backwards instead of being incorrect. It's just a picture tells 1,000 words, and he's telling like 1,000 vectorial,
Right. So Danny says there are a lot of weird theories out there how we could be all God and forget we're God, for example. Well, did anybody notice that we're still evolving? We are evolving. And this is why Jung said it was going to take 600 years, because his teachings and what he was talking about are going to take that long to permeate out into society. Maybe it'll be a little faster because Jung was not conscious really of the power of the personal computer and the smartphone. We can spread information faster than he imagined it, I'm sure.
Well, and then the general joke of, back before the internet, well, if we could just get everyone to libraries, it's about access to knowledge and reading, and that's our problem. And when we get the internet, we're like, no, that wasn't the issue.
Right. And, as I often say, I used to be impressed by scholars who had these libraries with their walls covered with all these books that they read. Well, even if it was true that they had read them, and I doubt that very much personally, but even if it was true, those books sitting on your shelf are dead. Okay, they're part of the superstructure of civilization upon which we have built civilization, and words are that. Okay, in other words, once we've expressed something in a word, then it provides the scaffolding on which we can build civilization. And of course, the truth is that Western civilization was built on the Abrahamic religions, particularly Christianity. But
and all those
there's scaffolding, and that scaffolding directs us to meditate on it and say what it really means. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, if you take only those words, all you've got is a scaffold, and you have to put your life into it and get into your psyche and understand what was being said there. That's the flesh. And as soon as
go ahead.
Well, as soon as Jordan and I have a word come out of our mouths or write a word down, that's scaffolding too. And you can believe us or not, it really doesn't matter to me. But the point is that they are a scaffolding for further evolution of the human psyche. And so we have a number of people that follow this channel regularly, including every Sunday, for which I'm very grateful. And those people will now take the things that they've heard here and even unconsciously some things will come to mind that we've said, and maybe that'll be 5 years from now, could be. Okay, but those things are rattling around in our psyches, and gradually they get spread out into society at large. And so that's exactly why I've been publishing a website and now this YouTube channel for the last 6 years, is to help get this information, this scaffolding out into the world to people who do not have access to it. You know, I would say that 95% of the people who either are here live or look at a video of this session, 95% do not have the books. And so what we're doing is making the books available for free. But what we're saying is not to be taken as gospel. They're dead words. They're a bunch of words, and it only has life. You only give it life when you meditate upon it and think about what is it that was being said, and let the words be a symbol for something that is deep inside of you. That's what it's about.
Totally. And I think that even to respond further to the comment about theories of us being divine beings, I don't think they're theories. I think inner divinity is simply a thing. It just simply is. And I think original sin and the co-opting of personal salvation by the church, when, you know, in farm times 150 or 200 years ago and prior, the church was the primary psychotherapeutic event. So it didn't matter if that was co-opted, because you're going to go back and grow the crops and come back, and every Sunday is your rest. It's your godly day, you know. And on the seventh day, God rests, you know. And so it's interesting to me, though, in modern culture, you have 7 days in every day. And so, you know, we have evolved to where it's, you choose your time wisely. I mean, look at the quotes. And the inner divinity to me is not a theory. It's actually just simply a thing. And I'm honestly, it's wonderful, but I'm not all
it
too
simply
impressed.
is. And
it is. I'm, you know, I don't sit there and worship it.
Right. And so this is Jung's point, which is that you have no need to believe. I can tell you about it until I'm blue in the face, and you believe me or not. And lots of people believe in every word of the Christian dogma. And, you know, that's fine, but you're living somebody else's life when you do that. When you believe, you're believing what somebody else says. It's not what you say. But you get to the point where you know. And when you get to that point, and it will happen to you if you're a thoughtful person, when you get to that point, then you know, and you don't have to believe anymore, and you don't have to believe anything that's in the Bible or any other sacred text, because you know now. You don't need a book to tell you. You're there. And
it's often when the thoughtful comes in to interact with the heartfelt together. I mean, the coincidentia, the two things interacting.
Right. Okay. So going on here, paragraph 664, we have already pointed out at some length how curiously God's salvationist project works out in practice. All he does is in the shape of his own son to rescue mankind from himself. This thought is as scurrilous as the old rabbinical view of Yahweh hiding the righteous from his wrath under his throne, where, of course, he cannot see them. It is exactly as if God the Father were a different God from God the Son, which is not the meaning at all. Nor is there any psychological need for such an assumption, since the undoubted lack of reflection in God's consciousness is sufficient to explain his peculiar behavior. It is quite right, therefore, that fear of God should be considered the beginning of all wisdom. On the other hand, the much vaunted goodness, love, and justice of God should not be regarded as mere propitiation, but should be recognized as a genuine experience, for God is a coincidentia oppositorum. Both are justified, the fear of God as well as the love of God. And so Jordan tells the story of how he was on the top of a mountain one day and nearly died because he didn't fear God enough
and got lazy and slipped.
Right, and slipped. And so the choice is you get to you say you're going to climb that mountain, and there are many people who have tried to climb Mount Everest and whose bodies are still frozen on the side of Mount Everest.
Interesting about this passage here with the righteous under God's throne. On that day, in addition to the laziness, I didn't know that there was about a silver dollar size piece of water in a little divot on the basalt. So when I stepped and I looked down, it was all dry. I had covered up nature in a way, and later I was told, yeah, I saw you there and you're usually hanging out on your right foot, I think. But so I didn't worry, but I didn't think I needed to tell you that you have water under your left foot. They assumed. And then no, on that day, I'm hanging out on the other side, so you're right. Fear was gone.
And so all the people that are in essence buried in the glacier of Mount Everest are people who didn't adequately fear God, and they thought that they could beat nature at nature's game, and they didn't come back. Okay, and even if their bodies came back, they didn't come back alive. They became part of the infrastructure. Thank you very much, Wendigo. I appreciate that very much.
And even the last passage on the trek to the top of Mount Everest, you are literally dying. They call it the death zone, because it's not about trying to cheat death. You're in a constant state of potential or partial asphyxiation. Your body is being starved of oxygen, and you are literally dying. So that's why you have to go up and come down, because the path up to the summit, capital S summit, the peak, the pinnacle in life kind of thing, it's a death ritual to summit Everest.
Right.
And that's, to me, is so interesting.
Right. And so God is coincidentia oppositorum, means that you are literally, if you're climbing Mount Everest, you are literally on the edge of death. And if anything goes wrong, if you didn't put enough oxygen in those tanks that you're carrying with you going up, you're either going to realize that, but more likely you'll asphyxiate yourself and become crazy and not know what to do.
Right.
And the answer is, get on a toboggan and go down 1,000 feet really fast and be able to stop at the bottom because you need more air. But I mean, that's fine. Science can tell us that, but God was up there at the top and you were right on the edge of, fearing God or having the love of God. So, okay.
Well, and actually what's interesting about you bringing that specific way to express that up, that's the numinous experience of disorientation towards death. Also, at the depths, in the darkness, scuba diving down past the point where there's no light that you can perceive, people get disoriented and they swim the wrong direction. They swim down. because they don't know any direction from any other. They may swim sideways, up, if they're lucky, but they sometimes swim down because they just start to panic and start to swim. But if you move at altitude too fast, you're going to fall, probably off the precipice. And if you move too fast in the wrong direction in the darkness, you fall out of life. I mean, you dig your own hole.
All of us, when we drive an automobile or go for a ride in an automobile, are also at that edge. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now that edge is set by local, state, and federal governments so that they establish rules so that if you violate those rules, chances are that you're going to get unlucky. And last year we killed 41,000 people on the roads, nothing like the number of people we killed with COVID and with drugs. We killed 107,000 with drug overdoses last year. But when you do any of that, you're literally at that edge, that sharp knife edge, where on one side the fear of God is justified, on the other side the love of God is justified. And
I love it. You use the driving a little bit on the edge when we're driving, when speed limits set and all that. But I remember in college on road trips, leaving out of West Texas, and right when we got to Oklahoma, there was a billboard, and it said 0 to 60, that's the law. 75, $35. 80, $50. 95 to 100, $100. 110, jail. And what's funny is we would always pull the car over, and we'd open our wallets and go, okay, let's pull our cash. How fast can we afford to go?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they still have those billboards, but it was always so funny.
You might get lucky and
so we can pay for speed. It's like,
you might get lucky and go to jail because humanity has gotten enough consciousness to know that that there's a risk of death, and therefore that's the level of punishment that you have to have in order to stop you from doing that behavior.
Right.
Because you're not only risking your own life, you're risking everyone else's right on the the road. And I had a numinous moment driving back from the Boston area one night, where I left at 5 o'clock in the evening. So I was literally driving in the dark most of the time until I got to Annapolis at like 3 in the morning. And what I was impressed by is the red lights in front of me and the white lights coming toward me. And it was as if we were on rails. Okay. In other words, everybody is following the rules, basically. I mean, there may be some speeders out there, but all other rules, like being on the correct lane and staying off the shoulder and that sort of thing, pretty much everybody is following that. And that's the hand of God. Okay, that's literally the hand of God holding those lights going away from you as red and reliable, and the ones coming toward you as white. And you have no idea who's in those vehicles. I mean, you don't know whether they're drunk or not, or drugged or not, and you don't know anything about those people, whether they're good people or bad people or any other thing. All you see is these lights. But you can rely on that hand of God to keep you on the straight and narrow. Usually, I mean, okay, eventually somebody might do something that causes an accident, and your fate might be that you also die because that person was stupid. But you know, it's a bet. And so,
So shall I do 665?
yeah, okay, one more. Yep, go.
Where are we on time? Okay.
665.
A more differentiated consciousness must, sooner or later, find it difficult to love as a kind father, a God whom, on account of his unpredictable fits of wrath, his unreliability, injustice, and cruelty, it has every reason to fear. The decay of the gods of antiquity has proved to our satisfaction that man does not relish any all too human inconsistencies and weaknesses in his gods. Likewise, it is probable that Yahweh's moral defeat in his dealings with Job had its hidden effects. Man's unattended elevation on the one hand, and on the other hand, a disturbance of the unconscious. For a while, the first mentioned effect remains a mere fact, not consciously realized though registered by the unconscious. This contributes to the disturbance in the unconscious, which thereby acquires a higher potential than exists in consciousness. Man then counts for more in the unconscious than he does consciously. In these circumstances, the potential starts flowing from the unconscious towards consciousness, and the unconscious breaks through in the form of dreams, visions, and revelations. Unfortunately, the book of Job cannot be dated with any certainty. As mentioned above, it was written somewhere between 600 and 300 BC. During the first half of the 6th century, Ezekiel, the prophet with the so-called pathological features, appears on the scene. Although laymen are inclined to apply this epithet to his visions, I must, as a psychiatrist, emphatically state that visions and their accompanying phenomena cannot be uncritically evaluated as morbid. Visions, like dreams, are unusual, but quite natural occurrences, which can be designated as, in quotes, pathological, only when their morbid nature has been proved. From a strictly clinical standpoint, Ezekiel's visions are of an archetypal nature and are not morbidly distorted in any way. There is no reason to regard them as pathological. And in the footnotes, important, it is altogether wrong to assume that visions as such are pathological. They occur with normal people also, not very frequently, it is true, but they are by no means rare. So continuing, they are a symptom of the split which already existed at that time between conscious and unconscious. The first great vision is made up of two well-ordered compound quaternities, that is, conceptions of totality, such as we frequently observe today as spontaneous phenomena. Their quinta essentia is represented by the figure which has, in quotes, the likeness of a human form, in quotes. Here, Ezekiel has seen the essential content of the unconscious, namely, in italics, the idea of the higher man, in italics, by whom Yahweh was morally defeated and who he was later to become.
Right. Okay. So let's go back to my metaphor of the driving regulations as an example.
Mm-hmm.
We had a new development at the very, very end of the 19th century, and that development was automobiles. And when those automobiles were first out on the road, they were running down horse tracks or tracks that carriages had gone down before. But human beings had enough consciousness to start seeing that there were accidents if people behaved in certain ways with those automobiles. So gradually, we developed more consciousness on what's the right way to go. And so, for example, we developed speed limits and found that if we controlled speed, we would have fewer accidents. We put stop signs at intersections so that people would know that there's a danger here if you cross this intersection without looking both ways. And, there are plenty of daredevils who out in the Midwest, they love to go at each other at an intersection and to see if they get by without getting killed. But I mean, those are daredevils who often do get killed also. And so what happened is that, there wasn't any consciousness at the end of the 19th century that there should be regulations of driving, any sort of regulation. And even today, we see some roads that don't have lines on them. But after some people started to put lines on the roads, then others started to say, I'm conscious too. Maybe that's better. And yes, I can see the road better on a dark highway when there are lines on the road, so that my headlights pick up those lines, and if I follow those lines, I will be safe even in the dark.
And that reminds me of the old joke of the two dyslexic brothers, and the one brother is going on a first date, and he's they're cruising along, and then the light's green, and it's green for days, kind of green. And he's like, "Oh, the light's green," and he slams on the brakes and comes to a just screeching halt. And he turns around to the woman with him, and she says, "Well, are you dyslexic?" He goes, "No, my brother is, and he might be coming the other way."
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
right, but the same thing happened with flight. When the Wright brothers flew their contraption down at Kill Devil Hills, there were no rules about flying. There was just, can we fly? That was the question. And so then they discovered that they could fly, and it's simply an amazing fact that 119 years later, and actually not very long after they did that flight, we could fly around the world.
Right.
And we could do it safely with rules that all were invented. There was no consciousness of those rules or the need for those rules at the time that those capabilities of driving and flying came into being. But they've all been developed, certainly in the lifetime of my grandparents, for example, because I had grandparents who were all born in the 19th century, or right at the end of the 19th century. I mean, one of my grandfathers was born in 1900, but the other one was born in the same year as the Little Bighorn, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so those are my grandparents. And so in the beginning of their life, there were no such rules. And there was, and, for them, there was no concept of having a refrigerator in the house. They used to, at some point, we were able to produce ice. And so, or we could cut it out of a winter lake or something like that and put it in an ice box where the ice was in there, and it would keep food cold. But, since then we, because we had that innovation that we could make ice, then so many other things came into consciousness. That's what inventions are. And so those are certainly godlike activities, and they get adopted by everybody. And so my point here is that this new perception now that Jung brought in large measure because of his 20 volumes collected works, it's actually much more than that. But and they say there's going to be a new edition that might have as many as 26 or 28 volumes. In his collected works, he brought together a huge number of insights that had developed in the human species over 2,000 years. And, even theologians have said, well, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way before. And now we have thought about it that way. And this is what Jordan and I are doing now, is we're helping people to see things that Jung said in a different way, or that he said at all, because in reading Answer to Job, we're making the book itself available to you. But the point is, we're bringing new insight, which now gets spread out. And, in 1903, there was nobody at Kill Devil Hills that was thinking about air traffic control at that point. Right.
I remember a real estate law class or course that one of the primary examples was the Wright brothers and the plane. But the joke was, when talking about doing something in regards to the ethics of don't do it simply because you can do it, the ethics piece was more broad in that they get up in the plane, imagine there's two of them, and one says, okay, we're up, we're flying, this is wonderful. Now, how do we stop? How do we land? And the pilot says, oh, we haven't gotten that far yet. It's like, okay, you die. So the ethics of doing something just because you can, cool, go learn to fly. Well, how are you going to come back to the ground? I mean, how are you going to hit the brakes? Well, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Well, and the Wright brothers hadn't.
Yeah.
They came down because their flying machine wasn't that red hot, but they didn't come down because they knew they had to reduce power to come down on the flight path.
Right. They did, the laminar flow over the wings and providing the uplift.
Well, they probably knew that much, but they didn't. Yeah. They didn't know how to construct a device, and they had no concept that laminar flow over wings would make it possible to raise millions of pounds up 40,000 feet in the air, 8 miles in the air.
And then without ailerons, we can't go down. We can only go up. Unless we cut power, like you said,
Right. So anyway, lots of things we've talked about, and I'm very grateful for the super chat from Wendigo here. And that comes in very handy, because this process that I'm doing actually does cost me at least about $500 a month more than I bring in. And so if you're interested in making a contribution, that would certainly be welcome. I live, for the most part, on Social Security and a small pension from the Marines. So any contribution that you make is certainly welcome. Probably I will turn off the chat function as I leave Zoom today, so that there won't be chat per se on anything that we broadcast out of Helena.
Because you'll primarily be on your phone, and that's pretty problematic.
Right, and I won't be able to see what people are chatting, and so we do have trolls that want to take over our YouTube channel all the time. And so we probably won't offer chat, but we will offer the actual things that we're doing and producing. The first thing that we're doing on Friday morning, about 7:30 in the morning Mountain Time, so about 9:30 in the morning Eastern Time, this coming Friday we're going up to a spring that is in at the continental divide of the United States. And so symbolically from that spring, we're taking water from both the left and the right. And the idea is that we're finding ways that we can bring people together rather than tear people apart, which is what our politicians seem to like to do right now. And so we want to create a new idea, which is bringing people together, and that includes getting religions to understand that they're all right and all of their sacred works are 100% true. Okay, I don't deny the truth of the Bible, not a word of it. But I do bring a modern perspective on those words. And so we are going to do some fun and exciting things over this weekend. We're going to wake Sleeping Beauty, among other things. And on Sunday morning, Jordan and I may be doing a tarot reading. That depends a bit on another session. But the idea of that tarot reading, which I'm going to defer to Jordan as a professional, the essence of it is it's going to be a reading for everyone. And so my point is, which I've envisioned for maybe 25 years, is that I can walk into a auditorium with 1,000 people and I can simply throw the cards across the stage and I can simply read the cards off the stage with no specific layout, and everyone in the room will think I did the reading exactly for them. And so this is a test to see if this happens with a professional tarot reader. What's your guess, Jordan?
Well, every card can apply to any situation, anytime. And so I find that what happens is with the reader and the person, the client, visual language strikes chords to resonate in the imagination. That rings the doorbell of the unconscious, the portal of the creative wellspring to well up nourishing contents. Picture says 1,000 words, and hopefully the reading will be shorter than that.
Well, it may have to be at least 90 minutes, or no, maybe 60. We'll see.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. Jordan, I'll see you in Helena, and there are no other scheduled sessions for this YouTube channel until the week after we come back from Helena. So 2 weeks from today, I guess we'll resume with our reading and commentary on Answer to Job. But everything that comes between now and then, with the exception of our advanced, we're not even having our advanced reading group. So
tomorrow evening and Wednesday afternoon, both are those are
canceled.
on. Those are
right, because we didn't want to start Anima and Animus in the Monday night group until we could go right through it. So anyway, we hope that you follow us, what we're doing in Helena. I think you'll find it very interesting. And like Dr. Jung, Tim Holmes is descended from 6 generations of Methodist ministers. And so he has a very definite personal perspective about Christianity. Many of his artworks do not relate to the New Testament. They actually relate to the Old Testament. And so I think that you'll find his artworks fascinating. And I think I'll try to get Tim to do a tour of his gallery when we're there and see if he'll comment on some of the pieces that are there. But in any case, so thanks, Jordan, and we'll see you.
Definitely.
See you
soon.
Friday, if not before. Take care. Bye bye.
All right, you too.
What day are you flying up, by the way?
Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and you know where you're staying. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So peace, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next week.